Hi everyone, and welcome into your second video of this Mythbuster course. Dimitri here, and in this video we're going to talk about how letting go of guilt and shame is essential to your recovery. What we'll be talking about is why guilt is not helping you in your recovery and what to replace guilt with, how the labels that you're using on yourself are hurting yourself rather than helping yourself, and why shame is a major factor in conditioning your addiction. And finally, I'll explain how to use exposure for a beneficial recovery and how you can use exposure to reduce shame and find acceptance. Okay, so we're talking about guilt. You've been watching pornography, you've come to climax, and now you're left with yourself and your devices, and you're feeling horrible. And most of all, you're probably feeling either shameful or guilty. So let's talk about the guilt. You're feeling guilty. Guilt is what happens when you break a social contract and you're harming someone else. The emotion you feel when you're harming someone else is guilt. And so because you're judging your behavior about pornography as pornography being bad or immoral or anything like that, you feel like you've harmed people or that you've betrayed the trust of other people in watching pornography, and so you're feeling guilt. And there's a part of us that think that the more we feel guilt, the more we're exonerated from the bad things we've done, the more we can find forgiveness, because if we give ourselves a really hard time and a lot of guilt, then it's kind of okay that we've done what we've done. So the guilt and the secrecy that you're using are feeding the addiction more so than helping with the addiction. The guilt that we're feeling after addiction is very likely to make us feel bad. And how are we going to soothe this feeling bad? We're going to watch more pornography. This is something we'll deal with in the next video. But the more we're feeling guilty, the guilt is the second facet, the second side of the coin to the addiction. There's the pleasure-seeking mechanism, there's the soothing mechanism, there's the consumption of pornography, the me time, whatever it is for you, and then there's the guilt and the feeling horrible and the judging, which is equally harmful to the overindulging. So the more you let go of the guilt, the less you'll be judging what's happening in the pleasuring, soothing, releasing phase, and the more you'll be able to integrate that to see for what it is and to let go of judgments. So what do you do instead of feeling guilty? Well, one thing you could do is to feel regretful. And while guilt has that dimension of blaming, feeling regret that you could have done something else in this time that you've been watching pornography, that you could have explored your sexuality in a different way, leads to the fact that, hey, maybe next time you'll do something different. It calls upon an invitation to change and do things differently and also accept what has happened. Well, I've done that. I regret it. I hope that next time I won't do it. As opposed to judgment, which is, oh, this was really bad. I'm a bad person, etc., etc. So replace guilt with regret. Even better, replace regret with no emotion at all. Now, this is where this is going to be challenging for some of you, but hey, what if you just watch pornography and then, let it happen and then acknowledge that, okay, this is what happened. I watched pornography and have no emotional reaction to that, but rather call upon a strategy, for example, or a plan, or an acknowledgement that this has happened. Oh, okay, I just watched pornography. Some parts of me needed to watch pornography well. I wish that hadn't happened. And so I'm going to make sure that it doesn't happen again and build a solid plan of recovery. Awesome. The more you're emotional about the act of releasing that you've done, the more you're going to actually feed that loop that's going to contribute to recreating these conditions and conditioning yourself to recreating the release and the watching pornography. Okay, so that's about guilt. Now let's look into judgments and labels for a second, okay? There's a lot. Okay, sexuality is very stigmatized. There's a lot of judgments about sexuality, a lot of moral codes, a lot of things that we heard that we should do, that we should not do. There's comparisons, there's imperatives, there's taboos. Whew, There's a lot of judgment about sexuality. But to be happy in your sexuality, the least amount of judgments you use, the more you're into a spontaneous expression of self, the more you'll be happy in your sexuality. And we'll see that as the fifth pillar, which is to live a fulfilled sex life. So we tend to use labels on ourselves. We tend to think that we're broken, and maybe we call ourselves an addict. Maybe we call ourselves, names. Maybe we're insulting ourselves. Think about the names that you've given to yourself and the things that you told to yourself, and how you would never speak to anyone like that ever. You'd never speak to anyone like that ever, because it would be such an amount of disrespect or so hurtful. But you've done it to yourself, which is, the hurt is there. The hurt is exactly the same. It's internalized, but it's there. So please don't do that. Don't give yourself labels. Don't call yourself names. Even labels like I'm an addict. Can we move that state of staticity? I'm an addict sounds like you're going to be an addict for the rest of your life. Can we move that into currently I am addicted to pornography, or currently I have compulsion for watching pornography? Now we have a temporary statement that describes who you are in this present moment, and out of that can emerge an intention to get better, to seek help, whatever it is. Okay. On the other side of the coin, do not be in denial either, because you're not calling yourself an addict, and it's great. Doesn't mean that you have to neglect the damages that pornography is causing in your life, if there are some. If you're watching pornography and everything's fine in your life, then keep on doing what you're doing. But it's when damage starts to arise in your life that generally you're already pretty late in the cycle of compulsion and addiction. And so please don't be in denial of what's happening in your life. And if it's time that something is done about pornography in your life, then let's do something about pornography in your life. And I'm here to help you. All right, so now let's talk about shame. And the myth is, I must not talk about this to anyone. No one must know about this pornography addiction, about this thing that I'm doing. So guilt comes from the emotion that we feel when we feel like we're hurting someone. Shame comes from when we feel like we're violating a social code knowingly, and we're still indulging in that violation. And so here, shame typically comes from repression. And you've heard things about sex, you've heard things about pornography, you have judgments about pornography, and you're violating these judgments for the benefit of pleasure, and so you're feeling shame. And this shame comes from repression, and this repression is preventing you from living a fulfilled sex life. Again, the most fulfilled sex lives are lived out of absolutely no shame. And there's lots of stories that come to mind as I say that, but I'm not going to get into that. Shame is entrapment. And so the more we're feeling ashamed, the least we're going to talk to other people, because, well, I'm so ashamed. If I open up, they're going to judge me. They're going to, bash me emotionally, maybe even physically. It's going to have really bad consequences in my life. So I'm going to stay with it secret my whole life. So the opposite of shame is owning it. The opposite of shame is owning it. How do you own it? Well, I'll talk about it in a second. But if I think about when I introduce myself to people, right? And I say, hi, I'm Dimitri. First thing people know is my name. Second thing people ask generally is, what do you do? So I say, well, I work as a therapist. Second thing people know is my profession. And then they said, oh, that's interesting. What kind of therapy? And then I said, pornography addiction recovery, because I was an addict myself, or I was addicted myself for 17 years. And I've overcome this addiction, and so now that's what I do. Third thing. The third thing that people know about myself is that I was addicted to pornography for 17 years. And I feel completely okay with that, because once you own it and you go over the shame, then people can't really say anything about that. And the reaction that I get the most is that people are, well, there's lots of reactions, but people are impressed. They're like, wow, like this guy is not scared about revealing his addiction, and I don't know him at all. There's also, curiosity, curiosity about me, curiosity about addiction, curiosity about sex, curiosity about what is pornography addiction, all this sort of stuff. Curiosity about my husband needs help, all these sorts of things. So the more you can own it, the more you can let go of shame. And the more you let go of shame, the more you let go of repression, the more you make room for expression of yourself. And expression of yourself is what the world wants to hear. Yes, even sexual expression that you deem, that you're judging in one way or another. Okay, so how do we overcome shame? We overcome shame with exposure. What does exposure mean? Exposure exposure expresses itself in a few ways. The first way is that you can break the taboo. And this is maybe a mini challenge that I'm launching at you with a lot of compassion in this way here. And please only do that if you feel comfortable. But what you start to feel better as a person when you break the secrecy, when you break the shame, when you break the guilt, and you start talking about these things. And as you talk about these things, you'll notice that people will not judge you. People will not have the response that you thought they'd have. And then progressively you start to feel that, hey, you are maybe an okay person who has a problem with pornography, as opposed to you're a completely broken person, irreparable, bad, shameful. It's just like, hey, I'm just a person who's got something going on with pornography, and we're here to support you, and congratulations on welcoming that fact about yourself. So, and here just a word of caution. If you're going to break the taboo with your partner, and they are a long-time partner, please be mindful that conversely there can be very strong reactions to that, and it's maybe not the best thing you do. But what about you call a friend, or you sneak that in a conversation, and a friend says, how are you doing? You said, well, good, but lately there's been a bit of a thing going on. I've been watching a lot of pornography. I feel really bad about that. And talk about your emotions and see how they receive that. And you'll see that if it's done in a proper, safe space, and it's not in public, but it's really in a private space, and people are ready to listen, then you'll actually feel okay. And it's like this backpack of shame has been just fallen onto the ground. And congratulations. So see how you feel about that. And if you're not comfortable about that, don't do it. That's totally okay. Another thing you can do is to join a community or a group of people who are in recovery. On Unhooked, we have a community where people can discuss their addictions, their stage of recovery, how they're feeling, how they're managing certain situations, etc., etc. So the more you're open and the more you're in a safe space and you can talk about these things, not only about the fact that you have this behavior or this compulsion, but also about strategies, feelings, situations, things you go through, questions you have, things like that. The more you're surrounded with people who can relate to your experience, the more you'll be able to let go of the shame. And the level above that is to have a dedicated session with a therapist, and we offer that on Unhooked. And that is a session where you really come as you are, and you're kind of like breaking all the taboos that you have for yourself, and you just rock up and say, hey, this is the pornography that I'm into. I have these certain sexual fantasies. I feel this way about it. I feel this way about telling you that I'm into that. And this is a really, really big catharsis. This is a really big letting go, because our therapist will not judge you, and you'll be having that space of 30, 45, 60 minutes, whatever it is you need of expressing yourself and letting go of the shame and letting go of the guilt. And I invite all of you who are suffering from sexual repression that is cultivated in pornography to do that. That is a very, very powerful unconscious reprogramming. Okay, so what did we talk about today? We busted a few myths. The first myth is that the more guilty I feel, the less I'd be watching pornography. Well, no, we've seen that the more guilty you feel, the more you'll be watching pornography. So please let go of the guilt, replace it with nothing. No emotions, just the fact that, hey, I watched pornography today. That's what happened. Myth number 2, using labels is going to allow to let go of the guilt. I'm an addict, I'm a bad person, I'm shameful. No, these labels are hurting you. Please do not use these labels. Rather, make a statement about yourself in the present time. Today I feel like watching pornography. Today there's a part of me that feel compelled to watching something sexual. Or in the past 3 months I've been watching pornography pretty intensely. Or maybe currently I am addicted to pornography. All of these are fine. They're not hurtful judgments. They're an acknowledgement of your situation and statements of truth, which is what you need. And myth number 3 is I must not talk about this to anyone. Again, provided it's done in the right conditions, you know that you can trust the person, you're in a safe space, whether it's a community, it's a therapy session, it's a good friend that you know is not going to judge you, then please break this taboo, break this secrecy, and own your behaviors, own your sexuality, own the person that you are, and forgive yourself in that process, and the people around you will have so much compassion for you. Provided they are okay themselves with the idea of pornography. If they're not okay with pornography, go talk to someone else for sure. Okay. All right. Thank you for watching this video today about exposure. In the next video, we'll be talking about the next pillar, which is the most impactful technique and the most impactful pillar that you can use to recover and change your behavior with pornography, and that is healing the unconscious emotional wounds that are sitting within your psyche. I'll see you there.